Hey guys, welcome back to another edition of Wiz Talk with Chase. I am your host, Chase Coburn, and today I am joined by a very special guest, a writer for the Washington Wizards for credentialed media site Bullets Forever, Marco Gacina. Marco, welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm glad you're able to come on. I mean, I feel like we've been trying to plan this for a little while, and I'm glad we're finally able to connect, talk some Wizards basketball. That's what we do here on Wiz Talk with Chase, so we're so happy to have you on today. Real quick, before we really break down the ins and outs, the X's and O's of this Washington Wizards team, just explain to the audience a little bit of what you do for Bullets Forever, covering the Wizards, and I know you also cover the Mystics as well.
hmm So I'm actually in college right now in DC, and so I really do what I can. Like it's not my job, but so I write for Bullets Forever, which is the Wizards SB Nation website, and pretty much whatever I can do, I pick up. Right. So Wizards games, I've got a credential. Same with the Mystics. Um, I do a weekly column. I do previews, I do recaps, I do basically whatever I have time for and whatever I can get my hands on. Recently, I've really liked doing the WNBA a lot more. That Mystics coverage, I'll be writing a lot about the Unrivaled League once it kicks off in January. So pretty much, yeah, just Wizards, Mystics, whatever I can do, I try to do.
Yeah, it's great that you have both a WNBA team and an NBA team to cover. While there hasn't been so much success for the NBA team lately, and we're going to break that down in just a minute, it's obviously a great opportunity, and we're so happy to talk to, yes, folks, a credentialed media member for the Washington Wizards. Now, I want to break down this Wizards team because I think going into it, everyone knew this was going to be a rebuilding year. That's also been very apparent through these first 24 games. Though, kind of as of late, you see that win over the Nuggets. I kind of like the competitiveness and the heart that this team plays with. It feels like, at least as of late, maybe not during that 16 game losing streak, but as of late, it feels like this team is playing with a lot more heart and really playing competitive games like that game against Cleveland the other night. And I just think that's a great sign to see from all these young guys as they're trying to rebuild and trying to build out this roster long term.
Definitely. I mean, such is the case with most rebuilding teams that kind of don't employ that have already moved off of most of their veterans is they play with that kind of burst and that drive and just like that infused athleticism within the roster. A lot of guys like on two ways, on non-guaranteed deals, pretty much trying out in real time for the league. And if what you're going after is energy on the court, that is one of the best ways that you can get that. And then you got a guy like Bilal Koulibaly in there too. Probably one of the leaders of the team already at 20. How old is he? 20 years old?
20 years old. Yeah, he's been great as of late. He kind of went through a little bit of a
Yeah.
slump, but yeah, Bilal's been awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you have guys like that who are just in the opponent's jersey all night, every night, um, that's a recipe for having an energetic squad out there.
Absolutely. You kind of mentioned Bilal Koulibaly. He was my pick for most improved player going into the season. And I've just loved what he's brought into the table because he does look like a most improved player, kind of an underrated candidate in there so far, averaging 13 points a game, 5 rebounds, also a steal, nearly a block. He's kind of brought great defensive energy. He's been a little less efficient as he's taken more shots, but I do kind of like the leadership role that Bilal has had. And I think you're right. Like having some of these two-way contracts and having these young guys, we're going to break this down in just a minute. Like Jared Butler, Justin Champagnie, like Johnny Davis, like these guys want to make a name for themselves in the NBA. And the way to do that is to have these games where you're popping off and all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, that's a starter for them? Who has that? And all of a sudden, scouts and other NBA teams are seeing that. And that's how you get those long term deals in the NBA. So I think, like, as surprising as it is, the logic behind the heart and the energy that the Wizards are playing with actually makes a lot of sense. I want to talk about those guys. It seems like Brian Keefe, the head coach of the Washington Wizards, is going deep into that rotation. Jared Butler, Anthony Gill, Justin Champagnie. The Wizards have dealt with a few injuries. There was a time where it felt like half the roster was hurt a few weeks ago, and they've gone to these guys. And now Champagnie's a rotational player on any given night. Butler's a rotational player on any given night. Anthony Gill was closing that game against the Nuggets, where the Wizards beat Jokic and the 2023 champs. What have you liked out of those kind of guys? The guys who we didn't even know we're going to make the roster going into the season and are now key rotational players as the Wizards are playing competitive basketball.
I mean, it's kind of what we touched on, the energy. You got to act like you've been there before, right? A lot of these guys have been on the very, very fringes of the league. I think of like Champagnie. His brother's on the Spurs. He's gotten a couple opportunities for different teams, I believe, but mostly been in the G League for his career so far. Really like I said, acting like he's been there before. Like he's going out and he's playing like a pro, and that's what you got to do if you're trying to stick around.
100%. I think that, like, just seeing, again, not only the energy, but just the success that these guys are having. He had such a great summer league, Justin Champagne. And I had Ari Meyer on, who does some writing for University of Pittsburgh. He also now actually does some stuff with the Wizards. I actually had him on over the summer, and I talked about Champagne. And, like, the conversation was, is this guy going to make the roster? And he barely did. Like, the conversation throughout summer league as the Wizards released their final, whatever it is, 15, 16-man roster with the two ways, was Justin Champagne going to make it? That was kind of the conversation in those final few days. And now all of a sudden he gets more and more playing time here and there. You see him start to play 1 minute against his brother in that San Antonio game. And then all of a sudden it's kind of been a snowball effect since then. He's gotten more and more playing time and had more and more success while doing it. And I think that, like, while obviously watching this from a perspective as a reporter and as a fan, for me, it's awesome watching the success, or it's not awesome, excuse me, watching the lack of success that the Washington Wizards have had over this rebuilding process. But I do think there is an element of joy in it as well, because you get to see these guys who you really don't know what they're going to do. Even the young guys as well, you're just like, let's see what they can provide and what they can bring to the table. And then you see what they do. I think there's also part of this rebuilding process that's really enjoyable as a fan.
Yeah, and just kind of on that point, like as a fan or a writer for the team, you really start to kind of get like an attachment to some of these players that are fighting for their spot in the league, right? I think of my first year when I was writing for the Wizards, Jordan Goodwin was on a two-way contract,
Yeah.
and just watching him later on with the Suns and the Grizzlies and seeing him kind of hoop, I was like, oh man, like that's my guy. I remember arguing in my articles that he should be getting more playing time, and now like he's out there hooping. So for a lot of these players, right? They won't be on the Wizards forever. They'll find a rotational spot on another team or a replacement spot for the team, right? And yeah, I mean that's just really fun. Watch and make their careers.
100%. And kind of that's what a lot of rebuilding teams, what they can provide to these veterans. Like, you kind of wonder, why do the Wizards have all these veterans? And I kind of want to transition to that. In the offseason, the conversation we had out here was like, all right, what's going on? Like, you got Jonas Valanciunas, who's like 30-something years old on a $30 million deal. You got Jordan Poole and Kyle Kuzma on $100 million deals. You have Malcolm Brogdon, who's a veteran. Sadiq Bey is making his fair share of cash. And so Rashad Holmes, like, it feels like this is one of like the older, more expensive teams from a rebuilding standpoint that we've seen in a little while. Usually teams kind of like to wash out all of that. The Wizards kind of seem to be in a mix of both, where they're not looking to contend, but they're also kind of bringing on these veterans on large contracts. And what I just find interesting is, I'm like, why would Jonas Valanciunas come here? And now all of a sudden you see Jonas Valanciunas on the trade block now, looking for more value, possibly going to a contending team. So you kind of get to go somewhere where the spotlight's not always on you, and you can get dished for future assets. And it actually kind of is a benefit at times for both the team and for the player. Let's talk about some of these guys. The two main guys that have kind of been hovering around rumors for throughout the entire season, but especially over like this past week, it's been Jonas Valanciunas and it's been Kyle Kuzma. Those have really been the two guys who I feel like have been audited off of the trade block for Washington for a while now, or maybe just stayed on it, but with lack of interest towards the beginning. Which of these overall veterans, maybe it's Valanciunas, maybe it's Kuzma, which of them do you see sticking around, and which of them do you see getting dealt? Because I feel like this could finally be the year where Kuzma gets dished, and I'd be shocked if Valanciunas is here in April.
Definitely say Valanciunas is the most likely to get moved. And you want to look at this. So I'd say someone like Sadiq Bey, that's unlikely to even play at all this season. There's really no reason to trade him. They're kind of just having him on the roster in order to stay above the salary floor. Uh, Oops, reasons for staying around, probably Malcolm Brogdon. I would say likely to at least stay the rest of the season. Uh, yeah, he's been in a lot of different winning situations, and he really knows like basketball games and how to make deep playoff runs. And so kind of as a mentor for a year, maybe year and a half for some of these guys like Koulibaly, Alex Sarr, Bob Carrington that are long term projects for the Wizards, then I think he's definitely something that someone.
Yeah, I really like what Malcolm Brogdon can bring to the table, and I think it brings up kind of the conversation for the Wizards of like what kind of value are you even looking for in a player like Malcolm Brogdon? Because like you even see some of these guys, like Kyle Kuzma's mentioned that he wants to stay in DC, and like why he would want to do that, I'm not sure. Being 29 years old in the middle of his prime on a decently large contract that other teams would still pay him though, like why would Kuzma, an NBA champion, not want to chase another ring? It kind of seems weird. What are your thoughts around Kuzma? Because I feel like people have like they associated the Wizards now with Kuzma, and Wizards fans don't mind Kuzma, but it just feels like he doesn't fit either timeline, his or what the Wizards are trying to do.
Yeah, that's honestly something that I haven't been able to figure out. Kuzma really just walks to the beat of his own drum, and I respect that. Like, go do your thing, man. But I don't. I guess that could be part of a broader conversation about the NBA. Maybe we as fans and analysts think too much, like assume at all times that every player is after the same set of outcomes. Like, I guess he just really likes DC. I know he opened a cafe recently. I have not had a
Yeah, I
chance to
saw
get
that. Yeah,
there.
yeah. Actually, my friend showed up to there actually on
Oh,
like the opening day or whatever while Kuzma was
oh,
there,
that's
which was
awesome.
awesome. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So maybe the business opportunities in DC. Maybe he just really loves the city. Maybe he really loves the organization. That's not something that I can speak on. Totally, that is all up to and on him.
Right.
But yeah, that's not something that I'm really familiar with.
I think that does kind of bring up a broader conversation, as you mentioned, because it's like not every NBA player just wants to go and win a championship. Like you think Chris Paul at this age would be like, 39 years old. My career's trying to wind down. Let me go to, I don't know, let's go to Phoenix and go back to Phoenix, or let's go to Oklahoma City. Maybe they'll take me back. Let's go to Boston. Do they need a backup point guard? Like, let's go to one of these teams where we're like, all right, maybe they can make a run at a championship that have the talent around to where I don't need to be the main star, and yet I can kind of chase a ring in that way. The Russell Westbrook method. You go from the Lakers to the Clippers to the Nuggets, and right now it just feels like he's trying to chase that ring. The James Harden method. It feels like Chris Paul would do that, and then all of a sudden he makes a beeline towards San Antonio, and people are like, why? Like, why would he do that? And I think it kind of does bring up that conversation. At this point, does Chris Paul want to be under the spotlight trying to win a championship? Because it's felt like he's been doing that for his entire career and been getting backlash for it. Maybe just mentoring other guys and kind of being that leader and showing that towards the end of his career is kind of the lasting legacy that he wants to make on the game of basketball. And I bring up that example just because I think it brings up the idea you just mentioned of like not every player does want to chase a title. And that's why you maybe will see players come to the Wizards as they improve, as you see Bilal Coulibaly become a star, as you kind of see this core come together. Veterans want to be a part of that. Veterans want to embrace that and help them improve. And so I think that what we're seeing right now with Malcolm Brogdon and Kyle Kuzma and those kinds of guys on this roster, I don't think that's something that is going to go away, because I think only as this team continues to improve but still stays young and not a serious contender, veterans will join the team. And eventually you get a good young core plus a few veterans who want to be a part of it. And that's how a championship team is made. So I think that obviously that's a long-term thing, but it is definitely a topic that you just brought up that I don't think a lot of fans really like to mention.
Yeah, and one more thing on that point, something we often don't consider with some of these players is that um, if even if they are not chasing a ring, but obviously they want to win a ring, sometimes the point A to point B path to getting there is not that linear, right? Sometimes you're gonna have to sign with a rebuilding team and then get traded into another team's cap space, right? Um, that way you could probably secure a few extra $1 million a lot of the time, because some of these teams, like the Nuggets, have a lot less flexibility in terms of the cap. So a lot of players, I think, if not explicitly, know that if they sign with a rebuilding team, there's a path for them to get traded to the destination that they ultimately wanted while picking up a little bit of extra money.
Right. And I think young teams are kind of there for that too, because like, fine, you mentor us for 40 games, 50 games, whatever it is. We'll kind of dish you there, and it's kind of like doing business in a sense. Sports is a business at the end of the day,
Right.
so I
Yeah.
think that's also something to think about when you look at the situation. Now, it's all fun to talk about what the future could be, but we do need to acknowledge right now, this is bad. What's going on with the Washington Wizards? Right now, they're tied for the 4th worst record/winning percentage in the history of the NBA, the worst point differential in the history of the NBA when it comes to an on-game average. Wizards are losing their games, just any game this season. They're losing them by an average of close to 16 points. That's even more than that Dallas Mavericks team that we saw, one of the worst teams ever back in 1993 when they had a negative 1,200 point differential. So it's just looking really bad. You saw a 16-game losing streak. You've lost 19 of your last 20 games. While we're talking about what the future could look like and the talented players on this roster and the value you can get in trades and the heart this team is playing with, we do need to acknowledge it. Is there a possibility, you think, Marco, that this goes down as one of, if not the worst team in the history of the NBA?
Yes. I would say they're well on their way to that. So have you heard about how every year the 1972 Dolphins pop a bottle of champagne when the last undefeated team in the NFL finally goes down?
Yeah.
So the 2012 Charlotte Bobcats do the opposite of that every time the Wizards lose, because the Wizards are well on their way to breaking that Charlotte Bobcats winning percentage record. Because if you take out that win against the Nuggets, they have not won since October. And It is almost 2025. So.
And it's so sad, too, because at the beginning of the year, it's a 2-2 start. You win 2 games against the Hawks team that doesn't look like far too terrible right now. We saw them kind of in the NBA Cup, I want to say semifinals. So they've actually really improved since that time. And it felt like there was all this positive energy ringing throughout the fan base. Like, okay, maybe this isn't a 15-win season. Maybe it's a 20-25-win season. Maybe you speed up the rebuild a little bit, the Baltimore Orioles style. Instead, it's like, oh boy, this is getting bad. It's getting late early, to quote Yogi Berra, to try to turn things around now. And it just feels like this team has now positioned themselves with a possibility to become one of the worst teams in the history of the NBA. And this is a conversation that we're going to have with future guests as well for listeners of this podcast right now. But it is something that we do need to acknowledge. It's something we need to monitor throughout the season. Is it possible for the Wizards to have the worst record in the history of the NBA? Again, it will definitely be something to monitor as we look at these next 60-ish games. I think it's 58 games remaining at the moment. Now, look, that would mean go ahead, Marco.
I just wanted to add, this year, I suppose, is a little bit of a semi-mulligan, but sooner than later, we're going to start looking at the Wizards more like the Pistons, where the Pistons haven't cracked, I believe the number's 25 wins in the 2020s yet. So things are going to be bad, and usually things start turning around for rebuilding teams, but they don't always. And so the Wizards need to be very vigilant that it doesn't fall into a full decade of just well below 500 basketball.
Right, and that is something to kind of bring up too. It's like, how much time do you give this team to improve? When do you actually need to start seeing the improvements? And that's kind of bringing up a whole different conversation for a different day. I think when you look at this Wizards core, there are 4 guys that I think everyone knows is going to be on the roster for a long time, and there's kind of no one else. It's Bilal Coulibaly for the 2023 class, as well as the 3 first-round picks from this class, and Alex Sarr, Bob Carrington, and Keyshawn George. Just looking at the way this team runs their offense and their defense, and just looking at what those players can bring to the table, those seem like the 4 solidified will definitely be here no matter what players for the foreseeable future. It does feel like, though, when you just look at analysts and you look at the result, the 3-21 start, that the Wizards are going to need someone else to kind of help them. And we're talking about them being one of the worst teams in the history of the NBA. That means they are going to get a top draft pick. It does also mean they could fall to number 5, though. I got to ask you before we kind of talk about the NBA draft, do you like this NBA draft lottery system? Because now it's at a point where it could be affecting the Washington Wizards as to where they could win 10 games this season, have the worst record in the history of the NBA, while getting the 5th pick in the NBA draft, because they're going to have the same odds as the next 2 worst teams, even if they're far better than them. So what are your thoughts on the NBA draft lottery system? And do you think it's valid? Since, to me, the whole point of it at the beginning was to stop teams from visibly tanking, and clearly the Wizards are doing that.
I would say that it's a necessary evil. Right? Until there is something better, it's kind of what we have. It's what we've got to work with. I definitely don't. I agree that teams who blatantly tank should not be guaranteed like the first, second, third pick. But I don't really know. I've heard some other proposals, such as like rotating and giving every team the first overall pick every 30 years, kind of in a rotating fashion. I think that would never happen. That's kind of absurd. But
Right.
for the time being,
Yeah,
I
imagine
think
one year like the Celtics win the championship, like, hey, you get Cooper Flag. Here you go. Like,
that would be
yeah,
nuts. That'd
right.
be nuts. But as far as like realistic proposals, the draft lottery is kind of the best that we got. I know they adjust the odds every few years, but at the end of the day, like the Hawks had like a 2% chance at the first pick, and they got it last year, so it does have its quirks.
It does. I feel like that's everything, though, and most models when it comes to predicting these things. I mean, not to go on a tangent here, but look at the college football playoff. That system is a disaster. I don't think like all fans wanted to see was the top 12 teams, and they've given us like 4 teams who are like in top 20. Like that's a whole different conversation for a different day. But it's just like sometimes sports can complicate things. But kind of with the lottery, it's like the devil you know is better than the devil you don't, in a sense. Like
Yeah,
you could bring in a new system, but you don't know the implications that's going to have on the future of the game either. So I think it's
absolutely.
another conversation that the NBA should have, but I think it's unlikely that it gets changed anytime soon. So knowing that the Wizards will most likely, no matter what, get a top 5 pick, that's going to mean a very, very talented player, whether that is again number 1 or number 5. And obviously, you have Cooper Flag, but you also have Dylan Harper, you have Ace Bailey, a few other guys in this class who a lot of people are really looking at as future like generational talents. Is there a guy kind of out of that mix, or maybe someone else that you're seeing as you're watching college basketball that you feel like would really mesh in really well with this core and kind of build that big 5, as we were talking about, the 4 from the past few draft classes plus this new additional player?
Yeah, so I'm not like draft is definitely one of the things I'm less versed on in the NBA world than everything else. But I mean, Cooper Flag has been the consensus top prospect for a long time for a reason. He would fit on any team in the NBA. His skill set is Wemby-esque in that it really just represents the most um, advanced form of basketball, right? And
Mhm.
so obviously he would fit anywhere. I think Wizards would also be a particularly great fit just with like the defensive help, taking the pressure off of him down low from Bilal Coulibaly and theoretically Alex Sarr, kind of like
Yeah.
a yeah,
Yeah, and he could kind of play like both. He could kind of guard all 5 positions. Kind of the
right, yeah,
6'8" wing who could shoot is like the perfect player to have in the NBA in this day and age, because it gives you it gives you the value from point blank range, it gives you value from 3-point range, and then you could also play defense and guard all 5 positions. I mean, outside of Michael Jordan, look at like some of the top, like you could say, most talented players ever in the history of the NBA, and you'd be surprised how many of them are these 6'7", 6'8" forwards who could shoot the lights out and drive to the paint. So you're right. Cooper Flag's been the consensus number 1 for a while. You always want to hear someone else being like, "Oh, Cooper Flag's not that good," but like how good Cooper Flag is, and I think it'll be interesting to see what direction the Wizards go in once we get to that point, because it doesn't feel like anything's going to turn around, and it feels like the Wizards are going to be in that capture the flag type race, if you get the pun. Kind of talking about that though, real quick. We mentioned adding one more player. What do you like about the score, though? We've kind of talked about Bilal Coulibaly. What are your thoughts on the 3 rookies this season? Because it's felt like it's been 24 games thus far, and it feels like not exactly uneven, but there's been like 8 games this year for each player where they've been the top rookie for the Wizards, and it feels like they're just shuffling through, and it doesn't feel like, maybe as of late it's been Sar, but it doesn't really feel like one rookie has separated themselves from the other, at least early on in the season. So what are your thoughts on kind of that rookie class and what they can all bring to the table in the present and also in the future for DC?
I mean, I really think it's interesting because it's 3 rookies from one of the worst draft classes in the history of the NBA on one of the worst teams in the NBA. But they've all been really great. They've been 3 of the probably 5, 6, 7 best rookies. Um, I really like how kind of poised they are. You know,
Mm,
it's kind of what we mentioned earlier with the act like you've been there before. They really clearly know what they're doing in a way a lot of even like highly drafted like highly recruited prospects don't. Let's see. In terms of specifics, I don't have a whole lot. We talked about the energy earlier too. I mean, I think those three and Koulibaly, like, damn, it's like a shaken soda bottle out there, right?
Yeah. And I think they just all bring like this great sense of athleticism. Like you mentioned representing the modern like NBA. Like Bob Carey did to me as a mirror image of Russell Westbrook, and like a lot of people don't make that comparison. But like the guy's a decent rebounder. He's not a terrific shooter. No offense to Russ, I'm a big fan of him, but like Russ's specialty has never been shooting the basketball. Like that's not what Bub does either. But Bub can attack the rim. He's a great facilitator. He can rebound the basketball. That's a guy who's averaging 10, 5, and 5 this season. Like I feel like as a rookie, number 14 overall, the Russell Westbrook comparison should be starting to ring around sooner than you think. But like personally, I love Bub, and then obviously Alex Sarr is a great two-way player, maybe bringing more defensively, and then Keyshawn George kind of brings a mesh of both. That's why I love those three guys together, because I feel like they all add something different when it comes to their skill set that I just love about them.
Totally agree.
Yeah, 100%. We're going to be talking about building out this core. Do the Wizards have the right team in place? Whether that be Brian Keefe at head coach. I mean, Kevin Durant says a lot of the development he had in his career, he thanks Keefe for that. He's now the head coach in DC after he was the interim for Wes Unseld last season. And then now also the Wizards have made some changes to their front office over the past few seasons. It's Will Dawkins and Michael Winger kind of running the show from the general manager's point of view and the basketball operations point of view, I should say. And it feels like both for the Capitals, Mystics, for the Capitals, Mystics, and Wizards, Ted Leonsis is kind of taking a backseat from how much of a role he has in the decisions that the team makes, and it's kind of letting the general managers more run the team. Do you think that the Wizards right now have the team in place, whether that be in the front office, from the ownership standpoint, or from the head coaching standpoint, to where you think that right team is in place to build this team out and make them a contender down the line?
Front office, definitely. The Clippers dude, I forget if it was just Winger, if it was both of them came from the Clippers, but I mean, like we forget about it now, but the 2020-21 Clippers, because they never ended up winning a championship and because they ended up blowing it in the playoffs, that was an insanely well-constructed team. That was like 1 through 10.
Right, well, Winger came from the Clippers. I think another guy did too, and then Dawkins came from the Thunder. I mean, he was Sam Presti's assistant for years. I mean, that's like, what are we joking? I mean, like the Thunder, look at them right now and the way they build their roster. Right. Actually, kind of exploiting the Clippers in a sense on that deal where they got Shea and first-round picks until the end of time.
Yeah. In terms of the head coach, that's something that's kind of unprovable until the team starts seeing success, right? Yeah. I've always been of the school of thought that the head coach is one of the least important aspects of an NBA team. They a lot of time more have the capacity to do harm than good. But I mean, from as far as I can tell, Brian Keefe has been a great coach so far. It would just be hard to definitively give an answer on that until the team starts seeing success or starts at least making the playoffs.
Right. And then you could really see, is that coach getting you somewhere? It's a conversation Orioles fans, I don't know how much you pay attention to the Orioles, but as an Orioles fan, it's a conversation that a lot of people are having about manager Brandon Hyde right now. It's like, all right, you took him from the rebuilding process, you took him from the grave, and you brought him back up, and you brought him to the playoffs, you brought him to a division title, but have you kind of reached your peak with that coach? And that will be the question for Brian Keefe once the Wizards start making the play-in and the playoffs and stuff like that. But that's many years down the line. Look, what are there, 58 games left? It's going to be a long 58 games, let me tell you. It's not going to be exactly easy for Washington Wizards fans. What's your number one reason why fans should be excited for these next 58 games?
Enjoy the tank. Just enjoy it. It's so fun sometimes watching a team tank. Like, there are obviously times when it's not, but just if you switch your attitude and kind of enjoy watching these young guys develop in real time, knowing that they're going to be there as much more developed pieces in the future, a tank can be fun.
Yeah, it can be. Marco Gacina, thank you so much for joining us today talking about Wizards basketball. I feel like we covered a lot today and hope the audience really enjoyed because a lot of great topics around Wizards basketball again, and I did think we covered. Marco, thank you so much for joining us today. And all the links to your work will be in the description below for all the viewers to watch. We appreciate you coming on.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It was my pleasure.
Yeah, we are so happy to have you on. And once again, the links to all of Marco's work will be in the description below, alongside Marco Gacina, a writer for Bullets Forever, covering the Washington Wizards and Washington Mystics. I'm your host, Chase Coburn, and we'll see you next time right here from Wiz Talk with Chase. Take care and go Wizards.